Hello everybody, my name is Paul Stolz and I've been invited by the Victorian Fisheries Authority to present at this year's Talk Wild Trout Conference, which is being done online, to present the 5-year wild trout strategy that's been prepared in the last number of months in partnership between the Australian Trout Foundation and the VFA. And for this presentation, I'm joined by my great friend and member of the Australian Trout Foundation, Ray Ferguson, who will be providing the titular audience participation to clarify any points that might be made that are unclear, so that you might get a better grasp of the intent of the strategy and its purpose over the next 5 years. But before I get into the presentation itself, I wanted to tell you a story regarding the importance of the fishery to people. And this involves a woman who was fishing on the Hauka River, and she was having what might be termed an absolute purple patch, where she was catching larger and larger fish and just having this wonderful time in a hole that was producing fish that she'd never seen before. It's probably a once in a lifetime circumstance, really. Anyway, as this was occurring, she got a phone call from the surgeon at Mansfield Hospital saying that her husband was in dire straits and she should come back immediately to the hospital. And she was torn between this amazing purple patch of fishing and having to return to her husband, and she had another couple of casts and then was struck by the gilts and decided she better go back. So she went back to the car park and got in her car and drove to the hospital. And when she arrived, the surgeon came out to meet her and she was still in her fishing gear. He said, "Have you been fishing?" And she said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I've got bad news for you. Your fishing days are over." And she said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Well, your husband has been completely disabled and he will need care 24/7 for the rest of his life." And she slumped into a chair and sobbed into her hands with her head in her hands. And the surgeon then sat down next to her and nudged her in the ribs and said, "Only kidding, he's died. How many fish did you catch?" So the importance of fishing for this mental health of this lady, etc., obviously, and for the rest of us, is very important. So I just lead in with that to demonstrate to you that the fishery is very important to people for all sorts of reasons. Now let me go to screen share so that I can share with you the presentation that I've prepared to take us through this. And we're just about there, I think. Can you see that, Mr. Ferguson?
Yes, sir.
Very good. I'll go to presentation mode so that we get this up. And there we are. Lovely to have you with us. So as I mentioned at the start before that little interlude, we are going to be presenting here the Victorian Wild Trout Strategy that's designed to be implemented from 2020 to 2025. 2020 been a little bit of a write-off year, but we will still continue to implement the strategy as and when COVID restrictions permit. The presentation itself, whoops, I'll just go back one if I might. The presentation itself will look at, first of all, who the two organisations are that built this strategy, that is the Australian Trout Foundation and the Victorian Fisheries Authority. Then I'll provide you with some of the background to this development, the content of the strategy itself and its purpose, and then finally a summary and conclusion. Ray will ask, as I said, any questions of clarification that he thinks anglers might need, and I'm very grateful to him for participating in this presentation. So first of all, to introduce to you the two major organisations that participated in the strategy development. The first one was the Australian Trout Foundation, and they proposed the idea to the Victorian Fisheries Authority. And the ATF's mission is basically to promote, protect, build the Australian trout fishery. And their major thrust, if you like, in doing this is to protect, repair and regenerate inland waterways and riparian zones. That's a major task, but there are other things that we do that we participate in, such as stocking trials, environmental protection elements, including spotted tree frogs and other native fish that require protection that we participate in as well. But our major thrust is the trout fishery, its development and protection. The second organisation involved in this strategy development was the Victorian Fisheries Authority, and to their great credit, they didn't have to respond to the invitation we provided them, but they were very enthusiastic about it. And this strategy has been taken right up to the Minister's Office for approval. And that's a first, according to the Victorian Fisheries Authority, in regards to a strategy that was developed via a partnership such as this. Victorian Fisheries Authority itself was created as a statutory authority in 2016, and it's responsible for managing Victoria's fisheries resources that ensure their ongoing sustainability. They cover a broad range of fisheries management, including saltwater fisheries, but their interest with the Australian Trout Foundation is obviously the freshwater fishery, particularly the freshwater trout fishery. Oops. So as I said, the scope of this presentation will be background to the development of the strategy content, and then a summary and conclusion. Ray will ask any questions, as I said, on the way for clarification.
Paul, just on that, where do the funds for the VFA come from?
Some of them are government and some of them come from the recreational fishing licence funds. Yeah. Which are paid by anglers, you know, buying a licence basically to fish in Victoria. So first of all, developing a Victorian wild trout strategy background. The background to this is that, first of all, we asked the question, why would we want a wild trout strategy, or why would we need a wild trout strategy? First of all, trout have a long history in Australia since the 1860s, when many of you will know from your history that trout were introduced into Australia, and that was a fairly long and arduous process, but it was finally successful. And it took place at a time when many foreign species, if you like, or introduced species were being examined. Some of them were quite successful, others became quite destructive, such as rabbits, for instance. And trout have a little bit of a checkered history, I suppose, in some ways. But in recent years, the Australian Trout Foundation has been working with the Native Fish Australia to ensure that both Indigenous and non-Indigenous fish species can coexist in a reasonable manner, so that no species is harmed by the existence of trout in our waterways. So we regard that as very important. Trout fishing also provides huge socio-economic benefits, particularly in Victoria, but also those are other areas. New South Wales is the other large trout fishing fishery, and both of those areas are significant producers of economic and social benefits. In Victoria, it's been estimated by an Ernst & Young report that about $750 million is fed into the trout fishery annually through visits to the regional areas where trout fishing occurs. So it is a massive input into the economy, and it's a significant input into regional economies. However, it's not only dollars that are important here, but it's also the social benefits and mental health, physical health, enjoyment of the outdoors, participation with friends are all parts of that social benefit and social license that we are granted to participate in this fishery. There was a lot learnt about the fishery through the Wild Trout Fisheries Management Program. The phase 2 of that ended in late 2019, and that was run by the VFA, the Victorian Fisheries Authority. A lot of research, or a significant amount of research, was commissioned to investigate reasons for the fall off around about 2013 in the trout fishery, and actions were undertaken to improve the fishery over that time. And we would have to say that that has been extremely successful, and the strategy for the next 5 years is built on those phase 1 and phase 2 wild trout fisheries management plans that have been so far undertaken. We have also discovered through the research that was commissioned in that management program that wild trout fisheries are perhaps amongst the most vulnerable in the world to warming climate and climate change. Hence, it is important that we try and devise strategies that would answer some of the more severe elements of climate change and warming that might impact the fishery. And hence, the science has told us that there are things that we can do to assist in sustaining the fishery, even given the challenges of climate change. So it becomes very important to plan that for implementation. Part of that science suggests that restoring habitat both in river and riparian is very important in sustaining the fishery. And the Australian Trout Foundation in the recent years has built its reputation on recovery of the fishery through habitat restoration and environmental protection. This will come out later in the presentation as well, but it is seen as a very important element in the process of the strategy itself, and perhaps a key plank, if you like, in its implementation. As you can see from those elements, tremendous progress has been made to date, but we need a strategy for the next 5 years that continues that process of restoration, sustaining, protection and building. And hence, this is the reason for the strategy and the reason why it has been developed in this partnership. Moving along, we're now looking at the actual process of the development of the strategy. And after the invitation was offered by the ATF to the VFA, the ATF and the VFA jointly sponsored a wild trout strategy development workshop, and that was held at Lilydale at the Box Hill TAFE campus, which is a lovely campus, obviously, over 2 days on the 3rd and 4th of October 2019. And we invited approximately 35 representatives of the trout fishing fraternity from across the state, and they were very generous in giving their time over the 2 days to discuss and work on the development of this draft plan. After that draft, or after the broad strokes, if you like, of the strategy were developed at that workshop, the initial draft strategy was developed through a consolidated representative steering committee, which was comprised of members from the Victorian Fishing Authority, 2 members from the Australian Trout Foundation and 2 independent anglers. And they took the broad strokes of the strategy that were developed at the workshop and massaged them into a draft strategy. Once that strategy had been confirmed, it was presented at the last Talk Wild Trout conference, in 2019 in Mansfield, and it was also distributed widely through VFA and ATF databases and social media, so that as many people as possible were able to take a look at that draft before it was confirmed finally. We called for public submissions in writing to be provided back to the committee by the end of February 2020, and some responses were gleaned from that request. After the responses were analysed, the steering committee met again, and the Wild Trout Strategy was finalised, printed and released as a working document for the next 5 years. Any questions, Ray?
No, it's all quite clear now. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. So now to the content of the Wild Trout Strategy itself. 5 key themes emerge from the workshop, and quite often these can be, across a range of strategies, but the first one that emerged was communication and engagement, and we will talk about the content of these as we go through the presentation. The second one was river health and fish habitat, and as I've spoken already, that's seen as a key plank of this strategy. The third major theme that emerged was fishery interventions, and that includes regulations and stocking. The fourth theme that emerged was angler access, and that's proved to be a fairly contentious issue of late, but it wasn't quite so when the workshop was underway. And then finally, to provide the resources to implement the strategy, the workshop felt that partnerships and co-management were going to be a significant requirement. So to the content of the major themes themselves, the communication and engagement. First of all, it was felt that the continuation of the Talk Wild Trout Conference, which you're participating online this year, but not in normal years, would continue, and that is to be continued, we hope, over the next 5 years, funding dependent. The next element of communication and engagement was promotion of the fishery, and there are various ways that the ATF particularly are looking at this promotion. One is through obviously pamphlets about fish education and fishing, trout fishing in general, but also we are looking at contacting individual councils to see if they would like to participate in promoting their region as a significant trout destination, and we think that that will provide also great impetus to the fishery to grow, if you like, in terms of people fishing, people visiting the areas, people becoming tourists in the areas, spending money, but also having a great time in the fishery. Education is seen as important. I mentioned pamphlets in the previous discussion about promotion, but education is seen to be important in terms of educating people about how to manage fish catch, that is catch and release, how to approach days where temperatures are soaring and the water might be warming as well in the streams and fish become stressed, how to manage the environment which they're in, clean up of rubbish, take all the rubbish out, etc., looking for environmental degradation that they might feed into further work that could be done, etc. All this is part of the education process, and we hope to engage anglers in that. And as I said, angler engagement, the Victorian wild trout fishery, for these very purposes, we regard as very important because they're boots on the ground and they can provide information that otherwise may not be available. And then finally, that information would provide the source for data collection and citizen science. And I can't say this definitely, but the Australian Trout Foundation has applied for funds to really ramp up this angler engagement and data collection and citizen science. Whether we're successful in that or not, we still have other avenues to pursue that, but we see this as a great way of continuing the sustainability of the fishery through this strategy.
So Paul, are you looking at considering an app, or how are you suggesting that we may feed information back in?
It's a very good question, actually, Ray. And the approach we've taken is two-pronged, if you like. One is to provide angling groups or clubs, or fly fishing clubs in particular, but angling clubs who are interested in photographic equipment, including drones across the state and GoPro cameras, to capture elements within the area that they might be fishing, including pictures of environmental degradation, the rivers, water temperature collection, fish catch for that day, etc., and feeding them via an app live back into the ATF website that could then be accessed immediately by anglers across the state to see what was occurring. That data would also then be used to attempt to secure influence regarding environmental development, environmental protection, and environmental rebuilding. And there could be also obviously in-stream suggestions of new structures that support fish habitat. All of these things could be fed in via that electronic collection process. And we're really excited about it. If this application is unsuccessful, we will look at other ways of securing funds that might allow this to become practicable.
Good.
River health and fish habitat, and that's all part of this data collection, obviously, but in the strategy itself, we're looking at devising a pilot program for Crown land river frontage licence management. Now, this is the uncontentious part of this Crown land licensing area, where we would be looking at clubs to take on a responsibility for particular Crown land areas to manage both environmental regeneration and in-stream regeneration as well. And the information and the background and the expertise for that would be provided by the Australian Trout Foundation to those clubs that might be managed in that area. We think that in this way, it means that we get greater coverage of environmental restoration, both in-stream and riparian, that is on bank, for those areas that could be managed and protected. The other one that wasn't discussed, obviously, at the conference and was not relevant to this strategy was the change in the Act regarding camping on Crown River licence frontage. And that's an issue for discussion in another forum, basically. The complementary area in this river health and fish habitat is seen as identifying habitat projects in partnership with the Victorian Fishing Authority, Fisheries Authority, the Australian Trout Foundation, catchment management authorities, and another forum called the Victorian Fish and Habitat Flows and the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. Those are major players in the management of the waterways of Victoria, and the Australian Trout Foundation has partnerships with all of those organisations and partners, and we are looking to prioritise habitat projects that we think would provide the best bang for buck over a period of time in terms of the environmental repair, regeneration and in-stream work.
Paul, are we looking at the sort of lowland areas? I was thinking along the Buckland River or the Narrial River, or are we looking more high country like Upper Halkwa?
So we've already done some work, significant work on the Buckland River, around the Ovens River. We've done some work in the lower areas such as Rubicon and Stevenson area. The Narrial Creek, we did some work which fortunately I don't think was overrun by the bushfires in 2020. And we've also prioritised some work on the Mitta. That's just to name a few. So the important thing is, well, I should say that Morses Creek has also been identified, not Morses Creek, Morass Creek up in the high country has also been identified as a great restoration project, but that's about 5 kilometres long and will require some significant input. But workshops have been conducted across the trout fishing areas with lots of local anglers and clubs, etc., to identify priority project areas. And we are taking those identified projects for recovery and working with the CMAs, catchment management authorities, particularly in DELP, to try and prioritise those identified areas so that we can gradually spread across the state in these restoration projects. Enormous amount of work to do, and the finances are not there to cover off on all of them at once, but over a period of time we hope to work our way through as much as possible. Fishery interventions is the third major theme that emerged from the workshop, and largely this includes two areas. One is stocking of rivers when deemed appropriate, and that includes the trials that the Australian Trout Foundation have introduced called the Jordan Scotty Incubator Trials, where fertilised eggs are placed into these incubators that you can see on screen. The orange and red or reddish orange incubators are placed in stream with those fertilised eggs, and they hatch in stream. They are wild trout over, and then they proceed to inhabit the stream as if they were bred in the wild. We're still conducting trials on this. It's been running for 2 years so far, and more research is required as to how effective this is in restocking recovery when major detrimental events have occurred, such as fire, drought, flood, etc. In actual fact, pardon me, there is a major restocking program being undertaken in the Narrial Valley since it was so severely affected by the 2019-2020 bushfires. And it provides us with a great ground zero approach, if you like, as to how a fishery recovers with some stocking input. So we're looking to that with interest over the next couple of years as well. 25,000 wild brown trout have been stocked into the Narrial system recently, and we look forward to what might be produced by that stocking. There's also been some other significant fry stocking this year, particularly. We've seen stocking in the McAllister rivers, the Dargo River, the Jamison River, and the King River. Around 50,000 fry in each of those. Are major stocking attempts to rebuild some of those fisheries, and there has been some lesser stocking in other areas, and also in areas that aren't seen as wild trout fisheries, that is in pondages, etc. So there is a significant stocking approach underway at the moment as well for trout. The other element of this fishery intervention is to look at the brown trout brood stock that is available to particularly Snobs Creek hatchery, and see whether we couldn't improve the genetics of this brown trout population and fertilisation. So we have undertaken, or the Gadens, actually, or not Gadens, the Snobs Creek have undertaken a review of genetic compilation of brown trout throughout the state, and that's underway actually as we speak, to ascertain the genetics of brown trout strains that are largely seen as wild now in rivers that have not been stocked for a considerable amount of time. And if they prove to be hardy, maybe tolerant of rising temperatures, etc., then there is a possibility that those genetics can be incorporated into future breeding programs. We are relying on feedback from anglers who are fishing in the fishery for information, and we have actually gathered some significant baseline data through a survey that the ATF ran in 2019-2020 that asked fishermen on the ground to provide their experience and understanding of the fishery in Victoria. And that's proved to be a valuable resource where a report has been written on that data. And the intention is to continue to survey anglers over the years to see whether there are improvements in some of the percentages that we recorded in that survey. The VFA also are going to monitor the current regulations that they have imposed in the Narrial Ovens, Midimitta and Rubicon rivers regarding bag limits and size limits. They're not introducing any other regulations across the state at this stage because they want to see over a period of years how effective the introduction of these regulations have been on these streams and rivers. So there will be no more bag or size limits at this point in time on any further rivers.
Is there any thought of blue river streams, Paul?
There has been some discussion regarding blue ribbon streams, and the nearest that we've got to that are those four rivers that you see there: the Narrial Ovens, Midimitta, and Rubicon. And I know what you're asking. Blue ribbon streams are commonly they commonly only allow lure and artificial fishing techniques. There has been discussion about this, and there was some communication regarding the establishment of that, and there is some interest in it. Further discussions are necessary yet to maintain or to establish an agreement about the possible introduction of those streams. Angler access is also part of this strategy, and it's felt that angler access is important so that people can enjoy the greater scope of the fishery across greater, area and greater kilometres of stream. It's not entirely straightforward, but what was discussed here, as I said, was not the camping on Crown River frontage that is being proposed and put before Parliament in an act recently. What was discussed here is the limitation or the limiting of access where access should actually be permitted. And the VFA has committed to work, not just the VFA, I should say, but they have committed to the strategy to work with the ATF and the catchment management authorities to improve angler access to rivers. Now, when this was discussed, one of the contentious points was that there were public roads on private land that should afford access to rivers. What had often occurred was that the gate would be padlocked, a sign might be hung saying trespassers prosecuted, no access, no public access, etc. And there are a number of instances where this has occurred, where that is actually illegal for the landholder to do that. So it is a matter of negotiating where these access points have been identified to open them up to anglers to allow appropriate access to the rivers beyond. It's important to stress here to everybody that access implies responsibility. That if people go onto a landholder's private land through that public road, even when they get to the stream edge, they need to exercise responsibility in terms of hygiene, rubbish, fires, and care. And that will go a long way to encouraging landholders to improve access where it should be permitted. So I stress that importantly, that this strategy, this part of the strategy, not only brings a certain hope for freedom of access, but it also brings a responsibility of access.
Mm.
And then the fifth and final major theme that emerged was partnerships and co-management. And the work that the Australian Trout Foundation with the VFA and DWELP and CMAs that has been done in the past has been done because of this stress on partnership and cooperation and co-management. And we've been able to achieve a great deal in terms of the reputation of the Australian Trout Foundation, particularly in the way that they have worked with other organisations to implement projects in a cooperative and partnership structured manner. So the strategy itself suggests that support could be assisted through the Australian Trout Foundation, VFA and DWELP working together to encourage and support the development of greater volunteerism. And I've got to say that through the survey that I mentioned earlier about that was distributed to Victorian trout fishers regarding the state of the Victorian wild trout fishery, one of the questions that was asked of the respondees was whether they were interested in volunteering on Australian Trout Foundation projects. 760 people responded to the survey. 550 said that they were happy to volunteer on projects that were run by the ATF. That's a huge jump and leap forward in volunteer base and enthusiasm. The only thing is that coordinating volunteers requires a great deal of time and energy and resources. And to achieve that, the ATF are seeking private sector and other government funding to support that. And part of that, it would be to go to helping resource volunteering in this area to recover stream quality and environmental quality, riparian quality as well, which is complementary in both areas. So the whole thrust of this is you look after the fishery and the fish take care of themselves, and that's the real thrust of this strategy overall, to ensure that taking care of the fishery provides a much better fishery overall. The ATF seeking private sector funding. We are working on a deductible gift recipient status for the ATF, which means that any donations provided to the ATF are tax deductible through approval by the tax office. It's a long road, I've got to say, and it's quite hard work, but in the end we are hopeful that we will have that status, and it would encourage donations from the private sector that would then go towards particularly environmental restoration. The other government funding has already been approved in a way through the VFA and the ATF jointly applying for a recreational fishing licence major grant which we were successful for a 12-month period. And we are also then going to apply in future years for continuation of those monies based on need to implement this strategy over the 5 years. The success of that application obviously is dependent on the needs of the committee as determined at any stage, but we are hopeful that they will continue to support this strategy financially. The strategy itself was an attempt to build on what anglers wanted, and from the information that we garnered from various sources across the state, we felt that what anglers wanted was the development of a fishery that was partnership driven, informed by science, and committed to the continued recovery and sustainability of the wild trout fishery. And we believe that this strategy delivers that, and the reasons for this are summed up here. The 5-year strategy is designed to continue to provide a sustainable and wild trout fishery for Victoria. That's its very intent. The way it goes about it is in various ways: improvement of water quality and habitat for recreational purposes. We look at taking account of the challenges of climate change on this wild trout fishery and how we can ameliorate the worst aspects of that. We are attempting to provide greater access to the fishery, better education about the fishery and the fish in the fishery, and the exercise of care towards both the fishery and the fish. And then it's an action built on partnerships that we hope will continue over the next 5 years at least. Any further questions, Ray?
No, Paul, I think you've summarised that all beautifully. I'm pleased to see such a clear plan, a clear way forward. I think the group's to be commended on achieving that, and the way you're pulling together a partnership for angler groups and other volunteer groups, as well as incorporating the VFA and the science potential there. It's very exciting, the number of things that can come out of this and improve our Victorian trout fishery. No, well done. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for your time, everybody, and particularly Ray for his participation, and we wish you tight lines for the future. I've just got to sign out of here. Stop share.